Hello and welcome to the online forest summit called BC Forests, the People's Convergence. I'm Jennifer Houghton. I'm one of the co-organizers, and I'm here today with Taryn Skalbania. Welcome, Taryn.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And with William Wagner. We're going to call him Bill. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, how's things going over
Good.
there? Smoky?
Good. So I'm coming at you today from Grand Forks, which is also known as the traditional territory of the Syilx, the Sinixt, and the Ktunaxa people. Taryn, where are you talking to us from?
Also the Syilx unceded territory, also known as the Smokanogan today.
Yeah.
Bill, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from Campbell River, and I'm in Pakwala territory. This is Cape Mudge and Campbell River Indian Nations.
Excellent, thanks. Well, thanks for being with us here today. Taryn, instead of me giving you reading off your formal bio, let's just have a chat and tell us why you got into forestry. What's going on in Peachland?
Peachland is a very great example of a very bad idea called the multi-use interior watershed system. And when I moved from a very privileged life on the coast where I could hike in untouched trails in the North Shore and ski at a beautiful scenic area in Whistler, and we have wildlife and fish abundant, I moved to the interior and I found that there's cattle ranging in my watershed. There's an open pit mine, there's clear-cut logging, and wildlife and soil and air quality, everything is sort of degraded to a manageable level. Because forestry is king, because everything can happen around forestry as long as we don't, reduce the amount of logs being cut. We can do other activities, but forestry is king. And I just felt that was completely unfair, inconsistent and unfair. That some of the province can be protected and some can't. So I said, of course, there's got to be other communities. And then I found hundreds of them, people like Glade and the people in the Yalacombe, Bridge River, Wymer, Lardo, Penticton, and then you, of course, in Grand Forks. All us people, we're just community groups, community-based. We're not environmental, we're not NGOs, we're not government, we're not special interests. We were just community residents, didn't like what's going on in our backyards. So that's what brought me here today.
Excellent. Well, you've been doing lots and lots of work, and I know that we need to keep a secret how many thousands of hours you've actually put in.
Yeah, apparently the farm takes care of itself, according to me and my husband. So.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, most people I think who are watching may have heard my story, but I'll just tell it very briefly. And so, yeah, I'm here in my house in Grand Forks, and I moved here in 2016. I was hit by a flood in 2017. I had 1.5 feet of water in my house then. 2018, I had 4 feet of water in my house, despite my best efforts at sandbagging. My wall of sandbags was 3 feet high. And then a respite in 2019, no flooding that year, but this year, 2020, we had more flooding. I had a good 6-7 inches of water in my house once again. Fortunately, I'm going to be moving here soon, but 2018 has been called the most catastrophic flood that British Columbia has ever experienced. 400 homes were hit. All of the businesses in the downtown core, some of them still haven't recovered. Small businesses had some serious trouble coming back after this one. There's still people living in trailers 2 years later. So it was a disaster on a big scale for a small town. And I decided to film a documentary about it, and I came to discover the cause of the flood is the clear-cut forestry in our watershed. And of course, we've had floods here in the past. There's a floodplain here, but not to this extent, not to this degree. There's been decades and decades of clear-cut forestry in our watershed. It's an 8,000 square kilometer watershed. The two rivers converge at Grand Forks, the Granby and the Kettle. And decades and decades of sedimentation coming down and settling on the valley bottoms. Stan Swinarchuk, who was in one of the previous summit sessions, he's been here for 60 years. He says, I'm seeing islands in these rivers that were never there before. There's so much sediment building up. The forests aren't there to hold it in anymore. And forestry continues unabated. And we have our little group that we formed here in Grand Forks, the Boundary Forest Watershed Stewardship Society, and we're doing our best. But like you said, Taryn, we're up against the same thing that all communities are up against. We are volunteers. We don't have a lot of funding. Most of the people in the group are retired. It's really hard to get young people involved. Everybody's busy, busy, busy. And here in Grand Forks, it's like the local government, their way of dealing with the flooding is to get a $53 million grant for flood infrastructure. So they're dealing with the aftermath, they're dealing with the consequences, and they're not going to the cause. Right. They're not addressing what's happening up there. It's like the roof is leaking and they're trying to figure out where to put the pots to catch the leak and how big the pots should be and what kind of consultants we should hire to decide on the pots, and nobody's going up on the roof to see what is causing the leak. And this is something that many communities are dealing with. Local governments just aren't prepared to deal with it. They're not ready. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the framework. They don't even have the mindset. Like, how do they deal with this huge forestry issue? So that's where I'm coming from. So Bill, you had a slideshow we were going to go through. We'll get to that. Was there anything that you wanted to follow up on now that Taryn and I have told our stories?
Oh, I don't know. I would imagine I'm one of the guys that put some holes in the roof, or in some roofs. I used to be a professional forester till I had a little bit of a disagreement with the association. That would be a story for another time, though.
So you're a recovering forester then?
No, I'm a civic forester now. I work for the municipality, and I work for the community, and then I work for the whoever needs a volunteer forester, because my company is a victim of the pandemic and economic times. So I've just kind of given up on it. I used to be a research forester for the Canadian Forest Service. So I'm just doing that kind of just for fun.
Yeah, so Bill, your background includes studying forestry at the University of California and natural resource economics at the University of Victoria. And you started your career in the US and moved to consulting First Nations in BC. And you also worked as a regional timber supply analyst. So you've got some varied and extensive background in forestry.
Yeah, I also worked for Herb Hammond. So that gives me another perspective, which is quite interesting. Quite different than most traditional foresters in this province. So.
Tell us, Bill, we just read an article that said that the timber supply review might be flawed, the way the chief forester comes up with it. And somebody criticized that article online, saying there are 25 qualified timber supply analysts in all of BC. And, you know, none of you other people in the province should be commenting on the timber supply. Were you one of those elite 25 at one time?
Yeah, I was. We had a different, let me see, we had a different chief forester at the time. I wonder about how things are being done these days. And also, it's not, the analysis we use is not spatial. In other words, you can't find these stands that they say exist. And I have a number of TSAs I've looked at that I would be glad to supply the analyses to you that are so much different than what the government came up with. And I'm still using the same government procedure that I was taught. That was about 20 years ago. I would imagine things have changed. You know, I would have thought our inventory got better. It's not. You know, matter of fact, we've got a long ways to go to catch up. I don't want to spend any time criticizing the the government is, you've got some really good people working for the province, but the people who are above them and the direction from below, just not there. And that's kind of why I've been talking to Jennifer and people like Jennifer, Bob Williams and people like that, is to try to take the power out of the corporations. They have lobbyists, and I think I just read a paper somewhere about the number of lobbyists that the corporations have in Victoria. How many lobbyists are in Victoria representing communities? Not very many. And I wonder how many politicians really do represent the people that put them in power. But I better stop there because I can get myself into trouble.
Well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for honest opinions. So why don't we move to your slideshow, and you can share as many honest opinions as you like. Karen, can you pull up the slideshow? All right, over to you, Bill. Take it away, and Taryn and I will chime in when we have questions.
Okay. The whole title or the whole subject here was of the boundary TSA, and I'm not talking about the TFL, I'm talking just about the TSA. And what I want to talk about is this area and the whole idea of the phoenix. The phoenix was a bird-like creature, and similar to an eagle or a peacock, and it lived in paradise. After many years, the phoenix grew tired of immortality and desired to move on. So it left paradise and moved to the mortal world. Once there, it built a nest and waited for the sun to rise. Could you click the title? The next slide is what I'm touching. Yeah, sorry. Well, the bird sang a beautiful song, and the chariot stopped. And he stopped, and the god stopped to listen to the music. And when the music started up again, when the bird quit his song, then the chariot started moving again, and a spark fell down and burned the nest and the bird. When the god resumed his journey, a spark fell from the sky and ignited the nest, consuming the phoenix. Later, the phoenix was reborn, and the ashes to live for another 500 years. It was believed also that it was impossible to tell a lie in the presence of the phoenix. And that's kind of where I'm coming from now. What's happening with the forest in this area is regrowing, and it has regrown. Can you click again? All these watersheds were cut over to feed the phoenix mine. And can you click again? In about 1860, a German engineer invented square set timbering. It's a framing system that used interlocking rectangular timber sets to support unstable rocks, and these cubes could be filled with waste rock to form support pillars, and the finished structure resembled a honeycomb. That's what the slide is supposed to put there. And using the square set timbering, so much wood was used in its construction that it was said a forest of underground timbers of enormous dimensions lay under the mines of the Phoenix, or in the area. In 1902, 10 years before the first forest legislation, 1 man out of every 10 was a timberman that worked for the Phoenix mines. He took large quantities of timber from the stands of Pine and Larch in the Granby and Kettle River watersheds to safely work these mines. Could you click it again?
Before you move on, before you move to the next slide, Bill, at one point when we were talking early on, you said to me in a phone conversation that a lot of the boundary forest is underground. And I didn't understand what you were talking about at first. And then you showed me this picture and I was like, wow, that's what you mean. So 120 years ago or more, a lot of the wood in our watershed was cut down, and it was used to create all these mines. And there's mines all over the Phoenix Mountain mine and extensively all over our watershed. So thanks for helping me understand that.
Yeah. Well, there's a tremendous amount of timber underneath the ground now. Matter of fact, a lot of it's under a lot of pressure. These almost 12 or 14-inch timbers now could be reduced to almost 2 to 3 inches. Somebody once referred to them trying to cut this wood is like trying to cut steel. Anyway, from a vantage point of about 120 years after the fact, it's difficult to say how much of the watersheds were cut or how the rapid rate of cutting really impacted them. The overall majority, more than 80% of the mature timber, is now less than 150 years of age in the boundary TSA. Accelerated cutting is again being applied in the case of second growth, with unintended but predictable consequences. Would you click the slide? And this is a kind of a look at how fast the boundary TSA is being cut. And actually, you have a time-lapse series of photos of this on your site, don't you? On your boundary watershed site?
Yeah, boundaryforest.org, we have an animated graphic showing the logging, and that was courtesy of David Leversey.
Yeah. Could you switch it again? Switch the next slide, please. This is what the age class distribution is in the boundary TSA now, and you can see that the large proportion of the timber is under 150 years of age.
Can you tell me the source of this data?
This is their timber supply analyst of about 2011. 2012, I think it was done. Okay. I guess maybe we could go back. Could you go back just a bit? Because you can see there's a couple of abbreviations there called THLB, and that's called the timber harvesting land base. And when the green is that is in the timber harvesting land base, the pink is that is not. Don't quite understand why some of the younger stuff, less than 75 years to 100 years, so much of it is outside the timber harvesting land base, but it is. Anyway, there's this accelerated cutting is causing some consequences. Now, can you go to the next slide? And it's kind of sharing the wealth of the watershed with the residents down below. This is a flood, I think, of this year. Could you go to the next slide? Of the infinite desires of man, the chief are the desires for power and glory. Russell said that in 1938. Could you go to the next slide, please? All this is power, and again, this is the flooding of the Kettle and Granby River this year. Can you go to the next? This is the face. Is this the face of glory or survival? Can you go to the next? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. Yet we're trying to do the same thing that we did in 1910, or between 1890 and 1910, in these watersheds. If BC forestry is to positively change, then the business of forestry has to be done differently. Can you go on to the next slide, please? The stumpage system and the allocation of forest tenure have dominated the industrial policies in the forest sector for the last 40, 50, 60 years. We need to shift away from the focus on the stumpage and the allocation of forest tenure and experiment with new forms of tenure that involve co-management with First Nations and municipalities. One idea is to use the Made in Canada solution. That's solutions that were approached during the Canadian model forest era. Another would have to do with using the trust system like they use in Oregon and Washington. Both ideas could use a forest village concept, which this is a concept of where the community actually starts developing a lot of the policies for those watersheds that affect them. Could you move on to the next slide, please? In January 2019, Bob Williams, ex-forest minister, declared his version for an answer to the forest sector's dilemma. He sought a rather top-down solution or means of bringing forestry back into the forest regions of the province. My approach would be to add both a little bit of democracy along with power to his suggestion, but it would be a grassroots approach. Bob went on to point out these weaknesses: the need to know the state of forest land management in the province. We really don't know exactly where we are. We know we are cutting quite rapidly. We need regional committees that oversee forest development for each region of the province. We need a forest charter that protects and preserves the public estates and directs its legislature to create value for the people of the province. We need a legislature that is both informed and cares about the status of the public's forested estate. We need a leader, a nonpartisan officer of the legislature that reports to the legislature annually. And he called this person Forest General. Well, I'm not sure if even the chief forester that works right now really can fulfill that role. I think it should, again, come from the bottom up and not from the top down. Could you go to the next slide, please? Power, the imposition of one's will upon the behavior of the other. And you kind of see it right there in Grand Forks when you saw all the flooding done by or as a consequence of not maybe rapid snow melt, overcutting, a lot of things going on. Could you do the next slide, please? These are the sources of power, which are personality would be the person that Bob was talking about that would report to the legislature, the property, which are the forests and the lands, and the organization, which in this case, the power rests with the Ministry of Forests and maybe the corporations, but definitely not with the communities. The instruments of power, condign, that's force. That's government usually keeps that one. Compensatory, that's money. And people, and mostly professional foresters, work and are paid for by either the government or the corporations. And conditions, power is that which we have come to accept, and we don't do very much about it. Can you go to the next slide, please? Some of the ideas in democratic politics facilitate active involvement of all citizens, forging consensus through dialogue, devising and implementing public policies, assuring all of us benefit from the province's natural wealth. Representative democracy has proven to be both very costly and quite ineffective. Thus, the modern state develops substitutes for institutional arrangements like the Ministry of Forests to effectively deliver ideas that, but often the cure, like here in Grand Forks, is as bad as the problems it was designed to solve. And one of the problems with us here is that these substitutes put in provincial objectives as opposed to the local needs, and often override local needs. Could you do the next one, please? We have little choice. We can either take back control of the public forest for the people of the province, or turn it over to the companies as fee simple and tax it for either the municipalities or for the provincial government. Could you go on to the next, please? Might be blank. What if we were to mix a good measure of power with democratic policies to build these regional committees from grassroots forestry and call them forest villages? Could you go on to the next, please?
Hang on. Go
Yeah.
back to that one.
Yeah. There's nothing there.
I know. That's why I want you to say that, because that was some good juice. So say that one again slowly.
Okay. What if we were to mix a good measure of power with democratic politics to build these regional committees on grassroots forestry and call them forest villages?
Thank you. Excellent.
Okay, next slide. Provincial forestry issues are too large to be addressed purely through legislative and regulations alone. Further, top-down solutions contain little practical guidance for those wanting to make specific changes in the way they manage forests at a local level. Since ecological, social, and economic conditions vary from place to place, there should be no single universal formula for sustainable forest management. I suggest that these committees or regional committees, whatever, be called forest villages. These virtual forest villages would be designed as large-scale living laboratories where people with an interest in the forest could participate in decisions about how forests could be sustainably managed. While village forests may not exercise decision-making authority over a land area, they could include in their partnerships those that do. Could you go on? The Canadian model forest offered examples of 11 or 12 different possible institutional choices for organizing these villages across the country. Go ahead. Based on my 12 years of model forest experience and comparing it with the BC community forest, it seems like these types of arrangements could play a singular role in aiding the people in forests adapt to living in harmony with each other. Model forests were designed so that people with a direct interest in the forest, supported by science and technology, could participate in decisions on how forests could be managed on a sustainable basis. I suggest that we have a number of village projects developed in the province, and each one would be made up of a team of Roman two-councillor system that would create First Nations and regional representation to create a vision and a charter for these forest villages, apply the knowledge developed in that process and create a business plan, the foundation for the village, and support the entry of innovators and First Nations into the village's startup business community. Could you go on to the next, please? This is determination, but this is good to know about trees. Just remember, no one ever made big money knowing about trees. No, but they have made some pretty big money by cutting them down. Could you go on to the next slide? Paul Shepard made an observation that applies to us here in BC. To those for whom wealth has literally sprung from the earth like milk from a tit, there is at best a poor sense of the cost of things, the value of work or of soil. In BC, we really don't know how valuable our forests are. And we really don't know how valuable our soils are. But we're learning in places like Grand Forks what that soils and water can do. Thank you. For the last. Where goes Forest? Where goes Forest BC? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill.
That was it was kind of jumpy there.
No, that was really good. I love the term forest village. It feels like something that's manageable, that people can wrap their heads around. It's not some sort of conceptualization that people can't relate to. And we're talking about regional representation, kind of even further down. Like it's been brought down to the ground level, the ground level piece, and the two consul system there, First Nations and regional representatives. I mean, that sounds like a win-win. Karen.
I think that in BC, almost all these land use decisions have to have participation at the onset with First Nations. If you leave them out of the equation, and so often, like we were going to reconstitute the coast. First, the government goes to corporations to decide how they're going to go about doing it. Then they go to the First Nations, and they don't even bother with the municipalities. Non-entity anyway, except for on tax day.
I agree with First Nations consultation. However, it's being used against us right now in the emergency with climate disruption. We need to make some decisions fast. And for example, this old growth review report, we had a province-wide consultation and First Nations were invited, and the panel went to 200 communities. They've been sitting on the results since January. They've had the report since April. They finally released the report yesterday, September. And now they said that they may not be able to actually move on it, on any recommendations, because they haven't had sufficient First Nations consultation. So we do need absolutely to work first with First Nations. What are their territories? Maybe those are the villages that you're talking about, the forestry community villages. That's the territory boundaries we work with at their pace, at their rate. I know there's 70% of the First Nations people I've spoken with don't want any logging in their communities or watersheds. And others, like some of the communities in BC, run by
if you don't have
Western.
If you don't have, you're going to have the situation like you have down in California, where they took a $14 billion a year industry and destroyed it, and then they let the forest grow.
Hang on, William. The first part of your sentence was fuzzy there. If you don't have what?
Okay. If you do not log, period. I mean, if you just say we're going to let everything go natural, then we're going to have things like what we have right outside: smoke, fires. Climate is changing. Logging is a tool that could be used. I'm not saying it's being used now, but it could be used to manage the water in the watershed, to manage the snow melt, a lot of other things, and manage the vegetation. In California, they were able to really cut back on the forest industry. They took $14 billion industry, and they were cutting way too fast anyway, and they cut it back to $3 or $4 billion a year. Very shrunk it, and many of those stands grew and became over dense, and now they're burning like crazy. Whole towns are being taken out. Whole towns are being taken out. Some of these towns weren't even safe, and you can use logging to safe the right of way so people can get in and out of those towns in a fire situation. Now, I agree that we are logging too fast, and in a lot of places shouldn't be logging at all. But you just cannot say in a period of tremendous climate change that you're not going to log, because that's.
I didn't say not log, but we have many areas in BC already that we don't log. Vancouver, Victoria, Great Bear Rainforest. It has to be left up to the local communities to decide if they're going to log, if they're going to do fire mitigation. And there's still lots of evidence right now that it's not fuel that causes these huge fires. It's climate change, weather, wind. I mean, the fuel is always there. The fuel has always been there. It's what we've done to it now. We've allowed the practice of reforesting with, contiguous coniferous cover is not great for fire management. We don't have mixed age species and mixed species in stands. So there's lots of things that already mankind has done to make the situation worse. So I don't know if I want to put all my ducks in the boat thinking that mankind's going to get us out of this wildfire issue. We need a lot more research done on it.
Well,
I don't know about,
lots of times research is just another word for delay,
Yeah.
And the government does, not just the government, but a lot of other people use the idea of research. By the way, there's very little research being done by the government, and even less by the corporations. So what we knew 20 years ago, we still know today. We haven't advanced that far and when it comes to research. But some of the fire research that has been done shown that you can minimize some of the damage done by fire by thinning a lot of the second growth stands out.
Right.
Boundary TSA, they're clear cutting them, instead of thinning them. And the idea is to get the fire down onto the ground and out of the canopy. So as long as you keep all those ladder fuels there, you're going to have tremendous problems. Matter of fact, there's a number of communities over in your area, like, for example, Nelson, that looks like it could be at high risk to fire. And I haven't been over a lot of the other. I used to live in the Nelson area, so I know a little bit about that one. But I haven't been in Grand Forks forever, and nor have I ever been, I don't remember ever being in your town either.
Peachland.
Isn't that a farming rural community? I mean, but it's mostly grassland?
Yeah, we're they call it semi-desert, but it isn't. It's grassland, ponderosa pine interface, and then low elevation Douglas fir. I think what's happened is we've had huge fires in parks in this area, and in clear cuts in this area, and in natural forests. Just like in the Quesnel Elephants Hill area, huge fires in clear cut areas already. So there is no single prescription. More fires start in a clear cut than in a natural green canopy.
I wasn't saying clear cut anyway, but anyway.
Yeah, because with, there's fuel in a clear cut as well. There's still grasses and brand new little baby trees. So I think it's we're not fire experts here. Every area needs its own prescription for logging and for fire protection. And
Yeah,
again, village by village, community by community. And maybe, you know, there are environments that maybe don't need to cut more trees down right now, unless it is
well,
for
that's
fire.
the idea of the forest village, where the decision would be made in that region.
Right,
Very hard to make those decisions in Victoria.
right.
Yeah, yeah, and I just wanted to chime in about the forest issue here. We went around our watershed about a month and a half ago with a forester in training, Eric Piccola, and there is a spot right beside the city of Greenwood where there's a big signs proclaiming fire smart protection. And we went through it with, you know, with someone who's almost a professional forester. We went through it with two people who have been working in forestry for 50 years. And we evaluated how they were doing the fire protection. And what they had done was they had clear cut a big swath. They had left really thick, unthinned bush in the next section. And then they had clear cut another swath. And so in the clear cut, what they had done is they had left behind a whole bunch of fines, all the dry brush and dying everything on the ground. So the way it was described to me was, this is what's going to happen. Someone will flick a cigarette off the road because it was right by a road pullout, right into that clear cut, right up against the road. The fire will rush across that clear cut through all those fines. It'll hit that really thick brush that hasn't been thinned at all, that thick forest. That'll burst into flames, and then it'll hit the other clear cut, and within 90 minutes, it'll be in the city of Greenwood. So William, when you're talking about using logging to protect from forestry, you're not talking about clear cutting. You're talking about a different kind of logging.
Yeah, I'm talking about harvesting, I guess, as opposed to logging. And that's with something in mind of what you're trying to do. And also, another thing we don't do here is follow up much. When we say we've got a prescription that we're going to make an area fire smart, like Greenwood you were talking about, we don't follow that up. You know, that means, do we follow it for 10 years, 5 years, 7 years, you know, to make sure it's still, you're still going to have to put input into the vegetation management if you're going to keep an area somewhat. You can't insulate any forest type village from fire totally.
No. Yeah, once you bring weather and wind involved, yeah.
And
Bill, I have a question. You know, you keep saying we need to be a little bit more precautionary because of climate change, and we aren't doing the research, and government isn't doing it, industry isn't doing it. I've heard of a recent study, academia is doing a study, but it's paid by industry and government, like a grant, to look into thinning forests or removing forests, turning that slash into pellets, and then burning as a biofuel. Do you ever get concerned that some of these research studies funded by industry is just an excuse to get into our forests?
Am I concerned? Because
Yeah.
of course I am. Research shouldn't be driven by the need to harvest.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the little cartoon I had at the end of the presentation. Nobody makes any money with learning or knowing about forests. Using them, they make money, but not knowing about it. But we really need to know a lot more. Forests are extremely complex, a lot more complex than we like, and especially the underground part of a forest. We don't really understand how all these parts and bits are connected. Herb Hammond, I think I refer to him every once in a while, he uses a precautionary principle. He'd rather use a little, let's err on the side of the environment instead of the economy. And actually, if you were to think about it, you know, we've had discussions about this ourselves. If it's not good ecology, it's not good economics either. You know, they both go hand in hand. So, and if you go out there for the quick dollar, that may look like good economics in the short term, but in the long term, it's not.
I wanted to come back to that too. the First Nations consultation and how Taryn brought up that, you know, the old growth report, the government has delayed and delayed and delayed, and now they're going to delay doing something real even more by using the excuse that they need to consult with First Nations. If the type of forest villages that you described were set up, where the structure was already there and there was already constant, regular consultation with First Nations and the people within the community, there wouldn't be any delays because it would be an ongoing practice. And the other thing too that I wanted to mention was Jim Smith, who was with the Vernon Log Sort Yard and the Creston Community Forest. We did a talk with him, and he talks a lot about small business, and that's something that would be supported by the forest village structure as well. Is we would enable small business, and Bob Williams spoke about it too. He mentioned an example of a community that discovered the solution to how to propagate yellow cedar because they were left alone and there wasn't the government trying to run things and manage things, and they came up with a solution like that. So things, when things are happening on the ground at a local level, they happen a lot more quickly when we're allowed to develop and manage on our own, instead of having this top heavy system, the centralized government making decisions for everybody. We all have to wait until they figure stuff out. But if we're on the ground here and we're enabled to make decisions based on what we're seeing and the conditions here and now, things happen a lot more quickly, and we can respond to fire, and we can respond to climate change, and we can respond to potential for flooding. It's a lot more efficient. Having smaller regional decision making.
Mhm. I agree with that. Also, if First Nations are involved, instead of consultation, you'll have participation, you know, and it will be their decisions too. And then you wouldn't see the blockade because they would be part of the decision. They've been too long have they been left out of the loop. I could go on a long time on this one. You know, I started out 20 years ago. Well, I started out with First Nations down in the United States. I was the manager of the Makah Reservation, and I was the forest manager, and then I became the manager. And I won't say the Americans have the solution, nor do I say they have the solution up in Alaska. And I know we don't have the solution here. We have to involve the First Nations in the decision-making process, though, especially on their lands or lands that they may or may not have ceded to the Crown way back when. Matter of fact, I don't think they did. Not in BC anyway. So we'll stop there and continue on another topic here.
I think we need to make a big banner for a forest march that says participation, not consultation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard from Ray Travers, of course, earlier on these programs, and he often mentions the Menominee Indians in Wisconsin, and their motto is keep some of everything. They would never clear cut their land because it removes everything. They said keep some of everything, and they managed to, on a small, I think 250,000 acres, keep a mill going for 100 years. We can't keep mills going for 50 years in BC on huge areas. Peachlands had 3 mills come and go. We can't even keep our 4 licensees here in constant work. So
but I don't like this 10-year system, you see.
No.
Small mills last a long time. If you cut, you know, if you go down to the States, even through the bad economic times, small mills, for the most part, continue running, mom and pop type mills. These things that they have running in Quesnel, well, they're shutting them down. Quesnel, the numbers of mills that have shut down on the coast, and of course, on the coast, we can export logs, so why would we put in Canadian to work? We don't know the value of work in Canada anyway. If you used to be time at University of Victoria, we had these shows of craftsmanship of the stuff that came off of our forests, violins, musical instruments. Oh, you just cannot believe that what people can do with the resource. But it's so much easier just to put it into a log, ship it to China, then we can buy it back. I've never figured
That's
that out.
yeah, part of what you spoke of earlier on your slideshow of being conditioned. We're just conditioned now to think that it's okay. That trees were meant in the forest to be cut down and turned into jobs and 2x4s. That's it. That's the value, or shipped.
I think that's part of why I'm so shocked and appalled by this system, is because I didn't grow up in BC,
Yeah.
and I wasn't conditioned with that belief at all. And when I discovered that that's the mindset, that's the mentality, that's the social culture, I was shocked that it's so deeply ingrained and entrenched. And I just wanted to come back a little bit to the idea of the forest villages and the regional management. And the question is, okay, we have these models, we know that they work, we know that they support small business, we know that they can last long periods of time, generations. And so why, if this is a better economic and financial model, and it's a better ecological model, why aren't we doing it in BC, and how do we get there? How do we create the political will to make this happen?
Well, you could start out with tenure reform. You know, first you've got to eliminate or neutralize the power of the corporation. And then you have to somehow find a number of politicians that will actually look after their constituents as opposed to their political party. So that's a start. How many politicians will really stand up to their political party? How many really do represent their constituents? I would ask you that, because right now we as the citizens, have delegated the power of harvest and all this to the corporations through the Ministry of Forests. And they love this licensing system where they only have to deal with 3 or 4 big companies as opposed to 3 million of us, But wouldn't it make more sense in a democratic system that they would have to deal with us, the citizens?
Jennifer and I have spoken many times. They don't want to even talk to community groups. They make it very challenging to get a meeting. Emails aren't returned. We need to do freedom of information requests. We can't get access to, when they ask for engagement, stakeholder reviews and have things like the Interior Forestry sector review process. We couldn't even get into meetings, or I couldn't. Jennifer got in. The door shut in our face as a community member. So we've even tried the route of let's go do a community forest, but you're stonewalled by having to log under FERPA rules, under the Forest Range Practices Act. Why would we want a community forest if we have to log the way that we don't like logging?
And what is a community forest anyway? Half of
Yeah.
them are not economic.
No.
They're not, I don't know. I myself like community forests. I like to see them quite a bit larger.
Yeah.
And I like to see the community groups actually manage them. Many times they set up a model just like a corporation, and you get a business manager, and you've got to have a professional forester. And right off the bat, that means he's been conditioned by the corporations and the government. Who hires most professional foresters? Corporations or the government? There's a few consultants too, but they work for corporations or the government. Not very few consultants really do work for community. I guess Herb does.
Yeah. And then you spoke about MLAs who represent their constituents. And one of the things I've been trying to encourage people to do is to get involved in politics beyond just voting, because there are candidates out there across BC who are running in their constituencies who would represent the people, but they don't have the money, they don't have the backing, and they need people to get involved in their campaigns. They need campaign help. And it's boring and it's tedious and people don't like to do it, but they need help to win. Otherwise, we're just going to see more of the same types of people become MLAs.
Back to what you said, Bill, about tenure reform. I need to know how I can get to the table with Government Donaldson to get there.
I'd like to know how I can get to the table. I've made how many times have government comes out and asks you to
Yes.
put a paper or something, they never respond to your questions. And I don't know how you can get the government to be more responsive, but it's not, you know. Not only do we need tenure reform, we need pricing reform. I mean, if we really knew the price of some of the value of some of these trees, your old growth, for example, we wouldn't be cutting them down. They have a lot more value standing. You know,
right.
They do ecological services, and again, we don't know exactly what they do underground, but my suspicion is a lot more than what we think. You know, I know they hold it together and they create new soil. I know all that basic stuff from basic ecology, but there's more to it than that. The tremendously complex ecosystems we're talking about. And then we go up to the Great Bear Rainforest, we got a whole bunch of regulations that say, this is an ecosystem, this is an ecosystem, that's an ecosystem. Oh, bullshit, you can't find them in land, you can't find them out on site. You've got a computer that maybe can start working with probabilities, and that's basically how you would define an ecosystem. Our ecosystem classification system was developed in the 60s. Isn't it time to change it a little bit? You know, there's a lot of things that need to be upgraded by research, and we just don't support research. But we do spend a lot of money in, you know, propaganda. We almost slipped out there.
They are changing our ecosystems. They're turning it all into clear cuts and tree farms. Yeah. One big massive ecosystem all across BC.
Yeah, one little second grove. Yeah. Well, there was a time, you know, if you were to look at the ecology of the interior of BC, lots of times in history through many generations, there was times of 6 to 8% of the land was not forest. I mean, was forest. I mean, it's just, we happen to hit a cycle that a lot of BC is now forest. You know, lots of times, 10,000 years ago, a lot of it was under ice, you know. It wasn't forest then.
So back to the topic of institutional arrangements or institutional agreements for communities. There are models that exist. We can call them the forest village models. The question, let's say the political will is developed. Well, we've got these MLAs who are supporting it. We've got Donaldson and whoever, whatever ministers, the cabinet is supporting the idea of going in that direction. Then what we need to do is the hard work of rewriting the legislation and the policy so that it all falls in line. And that's a time-consuming process too. And I guess, is there any sort of in the meantime kind of solution? Like, is there something that we in small communities and groups can be doing to change things before the big piece is made to happen? Like, where are we at right now where we can get something done?
Some of us are blockading. Yeah, well, some of us are hunger striking.
What I liked about the old model forests situation is you brought the company, the government, and the communities together at the table, at the decision-making table. And then when you're talking like that, some of the misconceptions can get straightened out. I can't. The word is not coming to me what I wanted to say, but you come up with interim solutions, and then you can start moving the whole machinery of these institutions toward what we're looking for in the future. But first of all, we have to decide, what do we want in the future? I mean, if you've got to have a goal. If you don't have that goal, then you might as well not even bother. You just stay with the status quo. Do you want to change? We as a public have to make a decision. Do we want to change, or do we want to keep things as they are, the status quo? And if we wait, pretty soon the companies will cut out of almost all the valuable wood and move on down to New Mexico or wherever the hell they're going. But they are buying a lot of American, from the profits they're making from BC Forest, they're buying an awful lot of international companies. So, and I know they're moving.
Bill, I have a question about that. You know how you said it's more difficult to find timber, it's more expensive to access it, it's more, the profits are becoming challenging, and therefore maybe that's why they're moving down to easier places in the States. How come then industry is still demanding us to lower stumpage? Isn't something that's hard to find or mine or extract or produce, if once things become more challenging and expensive, shouldn't the price go up with timber? Why are they begging us to lower the stumpage and give that less profits to the BC Crown and people who own the timber? Why is industry wanting to lower stumpage all the time?
Let me say, when you go in to buy butter and buy local and it's $5,
Mm-hmm.
you can get the import stuff from the United States for $4. What do you buy?
I buy the $5. I do.
You do? Well,
yeah, because I'm a farmer.
Okay, but for the most part, the whole thing is to reduce costs, make profits bigger. Then you can go down someplace else and invest the money somewhere else. They're not investing it here.
But if gold and diamonds and oil becomes harder to source, the price goes up. Trees are getting harder to source, and they want us to lower the price. They want us to give it away.
The oil company doesn't pay anything for oil anyway, does it? Do you?
That's another conversation.
I mean, yeah, let's not go there, but it's just good business to try to reduce costs, and they have people in Victoria trying to reduce costs. It's just good business. They do the same thing with labor. They want to reduce costs in labor. They would like, many of them, they were able to do it down in the States. There's a break to unions, because that's what keeps the cost up a little bit. We have really reasonable energy in this province, but they would like to lower it some more. It's just a good business decision to keep the cost down.
And corporations are going to do what corporations do, and they are profit-making enterprises. That's what they're about. And the problem is not that corporations are doing what they do, because we know what to expect from them. The problem is that the government is giving in to them.
What it's supposed to do,
Yes.
And the government, even the Association of BC Forest Professionals will tell you, the forests are in good hands. Whose hands are they in? They're employees of the government, and they're employees of the corporations. Who are the employees that are working for the people of the province? The 3 million or so, 4 million of us.
Thank you. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to go back to that you said, because I think this is an important point, is that you said an interim solution is to bring government, the companies, and the regional people, the people together at the table. And that's something that doesn't happen. So as a small group, we've been able to get the Ministry of Forests, their regional people to come and meet with us. We've been able to get Interfor to explain their plans for TFL8 to us, but we've never, ever considered all of 3 entities coming to the table together. And I think that's a really good thing for First Nations.
BC Timber Sales is probably one of the worst operators in, I should watch out for that, but they're not a good they're not friendly. Okay.
Nope.
There's more Forestry Practices Board complaints about them.
And they have the power of government behind them.
Yeah.
It's a terrible incident. If you were to abandon one thing, I would love to see, and turn that power over to the communities, would be BC Timber Sales, you know, and give the employees there the option of coming to work for the community, or staying with, or going back with the province. But I would get rid of that organization. I actually written papers on that one. I mean, they want to, oh, we don't need to go some of the issues that right now, let's not talk about them. But there are issues all over the province associated with that group.
Yeah, and that's that comes from the government not doing their job. They're a government entity. Government should be people. Government represents the people, the public, and yet for whatever reason, BCTS, which is supposed to be a public entity, has taken on a corporate model. But government isn't there to make profit. Government is there to provide services to the people. They're 2 different things. They're 2 different models. And I keep hearing lately, you know, especially down in the States, you know, oh, it'd be a good thing if the government ran itself like a corporation. No, that's not what it's for.
Jennifer, I'm going to go back to what you said about having industry, government, the community voice, and First Nations at the table. In Peachland, our Watershed Alliance has asked for that for 4 years. Our mayor and council has finally written a letter to Doug Donaldson in 2019 June, asking for a pause on logging and a roundtable meeting with government and community to see where we stand, what's the health of our watershed, and to have a say. He has yet to get a reply from that letter. We've asked for these roundtable sessions, community stakeholder input sessions. We haven't heard back. So government doesn't want to talk to us. Industry doesn't have to. It's not part of FERPA. And First Nations are busy with all their own federal issues.
Well, they've got a lot
so if all communities did continue to ask, like you just said, we could have, that's all we can do for now in some interim, is just keep asking for these meetings, and maybe we will get somewhere.
I'm not saying meetings. I'm saying that you need an institutional arrangement that sets up an organization that is community, government, First Nations too, and corporations.
Corporations.
Okay, those with tenure, that have tenure in this area, and they meet, and it's a decision-making body. First they've got to set up a charter. You know, it's like any other organization, you've got to start from bottom up, but it is, we have some examples with the model forest, but we have some examples down in the States too. I'm not saying a lot of the things that did in the States are great, but Idaho ran a number of experiments, and we have no pilot projects looking at these kinds of things in BC. Wouldn't it be good if we did? Maybe the best place to start is maybe 5 or 6 different pilot projects throughout the province to see how we can make this thing work better, you know. But anyway, we're not there. And I don't think even the NDP government is going to be very responsive to this, because they'll say, well, it's going to cost money. Well, everything costs money. But if we have a moratorium on logging, you'd be surprised how fast things would start turning around. You know, maybe said, well, the Americans, you know, we paid, they extorted, let's see, $4 billion out of us in what was it, 2006? How much are we going to pay Trump now to continue doing business with them? You know, I just say, why send anything down there? you know. Why did
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, why send anything down there if they're gonna use extortion tactics on us?
Yeah, yeah. And so we're running out of time. This has been a really good conversation. Did you guys have any final closing comments?
No, you'll have to erase all of this. Pause.
No.
You just said something, Bill, but I've lost my flow. Let me think on something.
The pilot project, was it?
Yes, the pilot project.
I don't like that word, pilot project, but pilot.
No,
What's a better
either.
word?
Experiment, initial attempt, something.
I just call it
We have asked for that in our watershed, our community watershed. Our First Nations logging outfit is doing sort of a pilot project. They are changing the way they log. They're not using FERPA. They are using First Nations silk forestry standards. They haven't yet wrapped their head around how they're going to clear cut or not clear cut, because FERPA still requires that you cut a certain amount of wood.
All these regulations and crap. I'm sorry. All these rules, they need to be reviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are not necessary. You take some countries like Sweden, who have very advanced in forestry, or some of us say are very advanced in forestry. The rule book is that thick. Just a few good rules.
Yeah, common sense.
Yeah, common sense rules. But we got one. Our rule book is beyond belief. The rule book for the Great Bear Rainforest is you need. I've got a PhD and I can't understand the son of a gun. Find this. We don't need to be that complicated, yet we need to be a lot more complicated in how we do things.
Yes.
These ideas.
What I want to say was the Nicola Valley has a pilot project for water sustainability with Polis, and they're using local government, First Nations, and the community, focusing on protection of water first, and fishing and the entire basin area. Jobs, of course, comes in, healthy environment, healthy economy. So if we could get some of those pilot projects for community forests, and I guess places like Creston and Harriet Proctor are in a way those kind of pilot projects. Harriet Proctor, Jim Creston spoke about the Columbia Brewing Company, how in order to keep the beer industry growing, you had to have good water, and so you had to log in a different way.
As far as pilot projects go too, there are some cropping up under the Water Sustainability Act. Mm-hmm. It's a different focus. The focus is on drinking water, but the more that crop up and give people some say about the land around them, the better. And I think communities have to keep pushing for these kinds of pilot projects, and pilot projects around forestry decisions are critical. We're all being impacted by these forestry decisions. We have no say, and people who don't care about our land are making those decisions. It's completely effed up.
And we're bearing the cost of flooding for you, dirty water for me. Caribou restoration projects are hugely expensive. Wouldn't it be better to just keep the land for the caribou rather than putting them in pens and trying to restore it later? The costs are going crazy in this province.
It's like the money's flowing in, it's flowing out, it's flowing in, it's flowing out, and mostly it's flowing out of taxpayer pockets into the pockets of corporations
and pension funds.
Okay, William, any final comments to wrap it up?
We could edit it for you.
I've got one. I still think we need to learn the value of soil and the value of work. I mean, you do need labor, and you do need the land. Capital comes and goes. We've got to really start thinking about the values of the forest and what we're taking out. Anyway, that's enough. You can edit that, please.
No, all right. That's awesome, Bill. Thank you so much. Thank you, Taryn. It's been a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground, and we didn't stick specifically to the topic of institutional arrangements, but it's all related, right? These are things that are on everybody's minds right now. So onward we go. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Much gratitude to Bill for bringing his wisdom and knowledge, decades of knowledge and experience, and Taryn for bringing your dedication. And I know that forestry was not your career choice, but here you are, and I'm in awe of your knowledge all the time too. Thank you.
Well, we all do get criticized by professional foresters, but they're not, they're making mistakes as well. And the proof's out in the backyard. So,
it sure is. All right. Thanks, you guys.
thanks.